proof, perhaps, that police body cams sometimes don't tell the whole story. There's no other way to explain what you're about to see. A jury in Arizona acquitted Officer Philip Brailsford of murder in a police-involved shooting. The suspect's attorney calls it the most horrific shooting he's ever seen. A quick setup for you. Mesa police are called to a hotel. Witnesses tell them they saw a man with a gun. Two officers spot Daniel Shaver in the hallway. Here's part of what happens next.
I said, keep your legs crossed! I'm sorry. I didn't say this in conversation. Put your hand here! Hands up in the air! You do that again, we're shooting you. Do you understand? Do not shoot me. Then listen to my instructions. I'm trying to do it. Don't talk! Listen! Hands straight up in the air. Do not put your hands down for any reason. You think you're going to fall, you better fall on your face. Your hands go back in the small of your back or down. We are going to shoot you. Do you understand me? Yes, sir. Crawl towards me. Crawl towards me!
Okay, so the video goes on. I'm just going to explain a little bit what happens next. There's a slight bend to the suspect's arm, and then that police officer opens fire, shooting the suspect 5 times. Dead. No gun was ever found on the suspect, Shaver. He was 26 years old. Mark Garagos is the attorney for Daniel Shaver's family. He joins me now. The jury evidently saw something in this video that you did not see. What was that?
They really didn't. I think what happened here is that this was probably the prototype of why you cannot have state courts or county courts try officers for these kinds of for misconduct. And let me tell you why. It takes a little bit to understand. The investigating officer who sits next to the DA, the district attorney who prosecutes this case, is from the same police department that fired this officer originally. However, the officers sat in the courtroom, the other officers sat in the courtroom wearing their black polo shirts with their badges on it, all in support, all testified in support of him that he did nothing wrong. The training officers got up there and said, this is exactly what you should do. And worst of all, the judge gave a jury instruction, which charitably can be called basically let an officer shoot anytime he wants if he claims he has fear. It really, part of the frustration I have about this, besides the fact that I know the family, obviously, I've known them for over a year, I adore his 2 daughters, they're just little angels, is the fact that I knew this was happening and I watched it in real time as they were engineering this not guilty. And when I say that, I don't take it lightly. I knew that if they kept this video under wraps and there was no attention on this trial, and I tried as mightily as I could to get the body cam footage out there so people could see what an outrage this was. I knew what an outrage it was. Anybody who'd ever watched it knew what an outrage it was. And clearly the judges knew what an outrage it was, which is why they never released it. Because they knew that any right-thinking, common-sense person would have said, you know, if this had been committed in Fallujah, it'd be a war crime. And here in America, in a hotel room, when somebody is a hard-working father of 2, you can just execute him and get away with it. It's crazy.
I must say, I watched I mean, you can see the video online, and the end of it is chilling because Mr. Shaver is literally begging for his life, and then the police officer opens fire. A question for you, was Mr. Shaver, I mean, who was waving the gun around? Did Mr. Shaver have anything to do with the incident that someone called in from the hotel?
Yes, Mr. Shaver works for a company, it was actually his father-in-law's, that goes into big box stores with pellet guns and searches out varmints at night, for lack of a better term. And so he was in his room and he had that pellet gun, and either he or one of the other guys was looking at the pellet gun. Somebody outside called this in. Now, I understand that. The police come, they're first responders. Obviously, everybody would agree with that. However, once they're in that hallway, and if you notice in the beginning of the video, the woman comes out. The woman they take into custody immediately without incident. She just walks out, they grab her, and boom. This guy, they've got him there. They're telling him, put your hands up. They're telling him to crawl. It's like some perverse game of Twister that we used to play, and then they just execute him. I literally execute him. 35 years I've been doing this, I've never seen a more horrific body cam footage. And the idea that the taxpayers who pay for the body cam, and it was a public exhibit in supposedly a public trial, and they still wouldn't let it out because they knew that if they let it out, they wouldn't be able to engineer a not guilty verdict. That's what's so galling about all of this.
So, and again, there was no gun found on Mr. Shaver's body, right? So what happens now?
Mr. Shaver was barefoot with basketball shorts and a T-shirt on, if you can look in there. What happens now is I've got a wrongful death case in the civil courthouse, in the federal court. But I really, that's only about money. My feeling is that cops should not have impunity in situations like this. The idea that he wasn't convicted of murder, I understand that. But the fact that he was acquitted of reckless manslaughter, to me, is just appalling. And I would say, if you've got any kind of a federal Department of Justice that's going to vindicate people's rights, civil rights, if this isn't the poster child for a federal civil rights prosecution against both Officer Brailsford, who's the one who shot, and then that crazy sergeant who's yelling all of that stuff, who, as soon as they do an internal affairs investigation, promptly ups and moves to and flees to the Philippines. I mean, those two guys should be prosecuted by the feds.
Well, we'll continue to follow this case. Mark Garagos, thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Carol.